An investigation was underway into a botched crime at the bank. Given how it was committed, it can be concluded that the criminal had special abilities. He likely possessed invisibility or teleportation. Nevertheless, they had a special security system, which prevented the theft. The intruder watched from around the corner. He was very upset, but still had to retreat to the exit. Once outside, the guy realized he had to try robbing again, even though he didn't want to. To reach his goal, he needed to use his ability 3 times, and there wasn't much time left to do so. That's because the so-called hero, another person with superpowers working for the government, would soon arrive. The main hero knew he shouldn't have gone on such a mission alone. Suddenly, a man in a mask appeared behind him, who was looking for the criminal. A simple girl was sleeping in her bed when she heard the noise of the hero fighting the lawbreaker. Coming out to the balcony, she decided to find out what was happening as she was very scared. Even though she was angry about the so-called villain's appearance, she hoped the special people working for the government would resolve the situation. Meanwhile, the main hero teleported again and reported to his boss that they were trying to catch him. But his boss didn't seem to care at all since the money wasn't stolen. The guy was mad at his boss because he knew from the start that it was impossible to commit such a crime alone. He wanted to say something else, but the boss suddenly hung up. Because of this, the guy was at a loss. He didn't know what to do next. While the villain planned to leave the service, the hero approached him from behind. The man unexpectedly attacked the criminal so he couldn't escape. He knew the guy's name was Hermes and boldly accused him. However, he tried to defend himself, claiming he was just walking nearby. Nevertheless, such statements were definitely false, so the truth could be found out during the interrogation. Moreover, the man caught the violator right at the scene of the crime. Now all that was left was to handcuff him and take him to the place of detention. The thief didn't lose his composure and started saying unpleasant things to the hero, distracting him. As a result, he was able to escape thanks to his ability. The man's manager scolded him for such recklessness. She was sure that if he had attacked the enemy unexpectedly and arrested him immediately, he could have been detained much faster. Fortunately, they managed to find the current location of the fugitive. Since only one wall separated them from the hero, the man was able to easily break part of the building and attack the criminal, who couldn't withstand the surprise attack and was caught by the strong opponent. When touched by the main hero, the government employee was able to restrict his movement. The situation seemed hopeless, but the guy kept joking, talking about his boss's greed, who only wanted money. Just as the guy said this, his boss appeared next to him. He also had special powers, so he struck the hero with an electric shock. Now Hermes was free. However, in the future, he would have to account for his failure. After that, they escaped together, while the government employee was left lying in a pile of wall debris. The man tried to contact his superiors, but couldn't because he only heard interference in his earpiece. The reason for this strangeness was the power used on him by the villain who came to help his subordinate. In the end, it turned out that the earpiece was broken, so he wouldn't be able to report the situation and would have to personally report to his superiors. As soon as a girl named Navy lost contact with her ward Royd, she was noticeably upset. Meanwhile, the man met another government employee who came out of the building looking for him. He was another hero and didn't allow his colleague who had arrived earlier to try to catch the villain alone. However, instead of any explanations, the guy simply said he was going home, as if he hadn't violated the order he received. Even though he was supposed to go to the office to sort out papers, he decided not to do it because he had a reason for an early return. The neighbor he lived with often came home from work at this time, so if Royd arrived on time, they could spend time together. All the man's colleagues knew about his crush on his roommate, so they calmly discussed the topic, even joking a bit. Nevertheless, the hero was always quite serious when talking about it, as he considered his feelings important. Besides, his assistant will get a bonus for doing more work than he was supposed to, so there's nothing to worry about. Repairing the wall will also take quite a while since the hole is obviously serious. At first, Royd was blamed for it, but he tried to justify himself by saying he was thrown to this building because of Zeus's attack. Even though the second hero was upset, the man still went home, leaving him to deal with the rest of the matters. Everything happened so fast that he didn't even have time to object before the employee disappeared through that hole in the wall. Royd immediately headed to his dwelling, but as soon as he entered the apartment, he realized that no one was inside. This meant that he had rushed for no reason, since he wouldn't be able to spend time with his beloved. Earlier, when feelings for this person were just emerging in the man, he assumed that living together would help them get closer, but now it was clear that this was not the case. Spending another evening in complete solitude, the hero pondered the possibility of stopping trying to get attention from the guy. After the shower, the man still sent a message to his neighbor, asking about the time of his possible return, but didn't get a quick reply. Considering that he saw the sent text, the roommate probably just didn't have the opportunity to write a response since he was too busy at work. Trying to pretend that he didn't care, Royd tossed the phone aside and tried to sleep after a hard day. In the morning, he woke up to the click of the front door, which meant the guy had just come home and was trying to be as quiet as possible. The neighbor turned out to be Hermes, whom the boss could hardly let go early in the morning, and he returned with a bruise on his cheek. At first, he hoped that the hero, whom the guy knew as Evan, hadn't woken up and was happy about it, but almost immediately realized he was wrong. The elder was already waiting for him, and as soon as the light was turned on, his silhouette became visible, which quite scared the late-arriving guy. Royd rightly noted that his beloved could work in the criminal sphere, considering how skillfully he sneaks into the house. However, he easily changed the topic, as he didn't want to reveal his true identity as a villain. He asked the man about the reasons for his early rise, as if he didn't guess that he himself was the cause of it. Of course, he tried to explain that he couldn't reply to the message, and that he came so late due to being busy. However, what concerned the hero the most was what had happened to the face of the man living in the same house. In fact, the guy got the bruise as soon as he returned to the office with Zeus, who was clearly not pleased with the failed mission and hit the poor guy. There, the man called his subordinate by his real name, Nolan, and openly told him that the job could have been done much better. Zeus didn't consider the problem with the security features of the safe important, and just saw it as a regular break-in and robbery. Due to another failure, the man had a hard time imagining what purposes his subordinate could be used for. The main hero hoped that he would be fired in such a case, as he had long dreamed of leaving the organization. Once, the guy decided to try using his ability to steal goods from a store, testing his powers for the first time. But on that day, he was caught by Zeus, and it became clear that this man could turn the thief over to the authorities, but he chose a different path and took the guy with abilities to his organization. Although it was not a serious crime, the man's words scared Nolan, so he agreed to meet all the conditions. Now the brazen boss decided to demand something more from his subordinate than is allowed between people of such status. All because, in Zeus's opinion, this was the only thing the guy was quite good at, and mistakes had to be paid for. During this act, a message from Evan came to the main hero's phone, and he wanted to go home as soon as possible. Then the boss advised him to try hard, because as soon as everything was over, the guy could go anywhere. Now, when the roommate asked him about the origin of the injury on his face, it was impossible to tell the truth, so the guy thought about how best to explain the situation. In the end, he started to say something incoherent, which made Royd worry even more, as he rightly guessed that the injury could have been inflicted by the boss. But the man didn't follow his movements too well and continued to squeeze the bruised cheek of the main hero, only making it worse. Only after a clear indication of the mistake did he correct it, even looking a bit frightened at the guy he accidentally hurt. The villain realized he could subdue his neighbor with simple psychological tricks, so he went to bed, advising him to do the same. Before resting, Nolan went to the bathroom. He examined the mark on his face for a long time before taking a shower. He knew it would become even more unpleasant and swollen by morning, so he planned to buy medicine for healing later. Suddenly, his roommate burst into the room, greatly startling the guy who had just started undressing before bathing. In fact, the hero was going to give the villain a special ointment that should help get rid of the bruise mark. The remedy was very rare, created thanks to alchemy, and also very effective in case of any similar injuries. The main hero was glad to get it, as even though the injury happened at work, the boss decided not to help him with treatment. The man showed how to use the substance correctly, applying a small amount of it to the neighbor's cheek. Surprisingly, after a few seconds, the bruise mark was gone as if it never existed, and the skin was back to normal. Even though Nolan no longer needed the ointment, the neighbor still left it in the bathroom in case it might be useful in the future. Wishing his roommate a good night, the guy took off his clothes and realized that traces of the incident were also on his legs. However, he didn't want to waste the precious remedy on something as minor as these injuries, so he left everything as it was. Anyway, thanks to Royd's help, the guy felt much better, for which he was very grateful to him. After taking a shower, the tired villain went straight to bed. This day was tough and unpleasant for him, and also full of stress. When the guy was dreaming, a man entered his room. He approached the bed of his beloved very quietly and just watched him sleep for a while. After that, he decided to check on Nolan because he was worried that he might not have told about other injuries received at work. Obviously, he had done this before, as he had already noticed the neighbor's habit of hiding his own problems. Suddenly, the sleeping villain stirred. It seemed he could wake up at any moment, which made the man anxious. However, when it turned out that Nolan was still sound asleep, the hero even sat on the edge of his bed, as only in such moments did he have the opportunity to be close to his beloved. Considering what he knows about the main hero's boss, the man couldn't believe that his body got away without serious injuries after the face punch. It turned out that Evan himself had bad intentions that night, but the sleeping man turned, thereby startling him. The hero was glad he could heal his beloved with the alchemical remedy and watched his peaceful face in sleep for a while before leaving. Waking up in the morning, the guy immediately realized he was very hungry, as he had even thought about having dinner the previous evening. As soon as he got out of bed, the villain noticed his clothes were unnaturally wrinkled, but he chalked it up to a simple habit during sleep. Stepping out of the room, Nolan noticed his neighbor already standing at the stove to prepare breakfast, with the aroma of the dish already seeming quite pleasant. This intrigued the main hero, so he started peeking over his roommate's shoulder, trying to figure out what he was cooking. He asked the man to share the wonderful dish, and of course he agreed, but noticeably blushed, embarrassed by such close contact with the one he loves. The guy was about to leave when his roommate brought up a serious topic for discussion, advising him to quit the place where he currently works. As soon as Nolan heard such a suggestion, he immediately refused, as it would be hard to leave from there. Nevertheless, what worried him more was the reason why the neighbor suddenly started talking to him about such things. The man was actually concerned about the consequences of such work, but Nolan continued to convince him that they were just coincidences. But there were too many of these ordinary coincidences, so it was hard to believe that it was safe there. Then the main hero confessed that there was actually a special reason why he couldn't stop working there. Of course, he himself would like to run away from there as soon as possible if he could, but he didn't explain why he couldn't do that. Instead, Nolan changed the subject of the conversation to ask Evan about his further plans and how soon he was supposed to go to the office. The man handed him a plate with a delicious breakfast and informed him that he would have to leave soon, meaning they couldn't spend time together again. The guy couldn't even have breakfast with his neighbor, as he was in a hurry and planned to just eat a sandwich on the go. Pretending he wasn't upset at all, the main hero said goodbye to Evan, politely wishing him a good workday. Left alone, the villain started to reflect on their shared life with the neighbor, which has been going on for several years now. Nevertheless, during this time, the main hero still couldn't get used to the fact that someone so attractive was making him breakfast every morning. The food was always delicious, and the man looked good every day and most importantly, was very interested in his neighbor. It was a good opportunity to start a relationship, but a major obstacle was the organization that such a wonderful person worked for. Even though the man held the position of a simple security guard in a government organization, he could constantly encounter heroes. So, Nolan had long resigned himself to the fact that such a good man would never become his partner and regarded him as just a neighbor. Meanwhile, Evan had already entered the office, where he was greeted by a young employee who offered to go up to the management together. She was leaving for lunch, having already worked part of her time, unlike the hero, who only appeared by lunchtime. Another person with special abilities who stayed to deal with the aftermath of the incident yesterday was coming to meet them. He had to spend the whole night at the scene because Evan left without doing even part of the routine work. However, this allowed at least one of them to not only rest, but also get closer to successfully arranging their personal life. So, Evan looked happy and wasn't afraid to openly show it to his tired colleague who disapproved of his behavior. The girl tried to calm her colleagues a bit, so she called the elevator and invited them to join her. The tired guy was asked by the man to prepare an alchemical ointment for healing wounds again, and then stayed downstairs when the other two went up in the elevator. In the end, the one who worked all night couldn't understand why his colleague needed the medicine for healing wounds. Evan didn't talk to the girl who offered to go up with him because he kept thinking about his neighbor, amused by his own thoughts. The employee didn't understand what was happening to him, but probably one day it will become clearer to her when she meets someone she loves. They discussed this when they approached the boss's desk, who rudely tried to find out where the workers had been for so long. Still unable to focus on work, the man even talked about love affairs with the management. Of course, this irritated the boss even more, as she was already angry with the man for not being able to catch the criminal yesterday. However, since these two came together, the girl decided to send them to patrol the place where the bank robbery attempt was made yesterday. On the one hand, the idea seemed silly because no criminal would return to the same place after a recent failed robbery. Moreover, it was a good opportunity to train new employees, considering that there probably wouldn't be any real danger. However, the boss asked the subordinates not to destroy another wall there, as they would have problems again. Meanwhile, the main hero was also supposed to come to work, despite what happened last night between him and the boss. He found the man with another partner who wasn't shy about doing indecent things in a place where anyone could enter at any moment. The guy wanted to leave the room and come back later for a conversation when everything was over. At first, Zeus pretended he didn't mind sending the employee away, but then he immediately ordered him to come back and explain the reason for his appearance in the office. The guy, who was Zeus's new love interest, looked jealously at the main hero, as if he knew that he had been in his place before. Unfortunately, the man had to interrupt what was happening, as he couldn't talk to a subordinate in that way. He explained to Nolan that since the guy complained about always doing tasks alone, he would now have a partner. The main hero began to speak boldly to the man, asking for dismissal once again, for which he received an electric shock. Now he had to, albeit reluctantly, pretend to be polite to avoid being injured again. He just demanded that the worker perform the tasks well, which he had been failing one after another. The new team member was named Ares. He had previously worked with Zeus somewhere else, which meant he had performed well there. This seemed strange, as the man had always talked about preferring to work alone most of the time. Now the two villains had to finish what the main hero couldn't do before, even though it seemed like a very foolish idea. But Ares was ready to follow the order. Nolan understood that he would have to keep an eye on this strange guy all the time while they were working together. No matter how much Nolan resisted, he still had to go on the mission with Ares, who also kept mocking the more experienced guy. At first, Hermes tried to ignore everything this person said to him, but at some point, he could no longer ignore him. All because he expressed his personal dislike for the main hero too openly, for example, calling his power useless. Then the guy decided that if he calmly talked to the newcomer, he might be able to establish contact with him, as they were about to commit an important theft together. To reduce Ares's dislike, the main hero openly told him that he had no romantic relationship with their boss. Yes, there was close contact between them, but for someone like Zeus, such things don't carry a particularly deep meaning. Moreover, Hermes did it not because he had any affection for the man, but simply because he had no other choice. None of them intended to become a couple or have a long-term love affair, so the newcomer's jealousy was groundless. So he simply suggested calmly finishing the job in which they were forced to cooperate and hoping that they would never see each other again. While Hermes was saying something, Ares was examining his body, trying to understand what exactly the boss liked about him. Suddenly, he remembered how he once heard from the man that the most beautiful part of a person he likes is a specific part of their body. Assuming it could be Hermes, the guy decided to look at that area without clothes, directly asking him to show it. This shocked the main hero. He couldn't understand how a sane person could say such a thing, especially on the way to an important mission. When he tried to refuse, Ares insisted, as he was sure he wouldn't be able to focus on the mission without getting what he wanted. At the same time, he couldn't reveal the true reason for what was happening, as Hermes might then feel confident and bother the boss. Then Ares tried to see everything he wanted by forcing the main hero to undress using physical strength, for which he received a strong punch to the cheek as the guy tried to protect himself from the newcomer's strange actions. However, the use of physical force greatly angered him, so Ares looked at his partner even more angrily. Meanwhile, Evan was patrolling the area with his partner, both wearing masks that didn't allow their identities to be recognized on the street. Of course, the likelihood that criminals would come back to the same place where they were almost caught recently is very low, so after a few hours, they could probably go home. The man felt strange, and suddenly they both noticed that teleportation magic was being used nearby. At the same moment, the man quickly left, telling the girl to follow. He realized that a villain was nearby, so he started looking for him in the vicinity, and upon turning a corner, he saw a strange scene. One of the villains was next to the other and seemed to be preparing to hit him with all his might, while the second one was already lying on the floor. At first, they didn't look like partners, but after Ares's words, the man understood that they worked together but didn't get along well with each other. Using the opportunity of their distracted attention, the hero suddenly approached closer and hit the newcomer, knocking him down on the asphalt. The main hero initially tried to protect Ares, but in the end, he couldn't do it because he himself attacked the government organization's employee. The guy was absolutely sure he could win, but he was wrong. Just one hit from the man, and now he realized he was weaker. Meanwhile, Hermes was trying to contact the management, but couldn't, which made him very angry at Zeus. Nevertheless, the guy decided to try to escape, leaving his partner behind, convinced that he could explain such an act as a simple attempt to save himself. However, unfortunately, the hero noticed this and stopped him by simply throwing the beaten newcomer at him. He accidentally grabbed a piece of fabric that had covered Hermes's face all this time and helped him remain unnoticed. Now the hero knew his true identity and for some reason did not attack, just froze in place instead. When the hero's partner caught up with him, the villains they had caught were already gone, and he himself was behaving strangely. The girl couldn't understand what had happened to him, so she was very worried, but he couldn't explain anything to her either. Meanwhile, Hermes arrived back at the office and brought his partner with him, who seemed to be unconscious. The guy couldn't believe he had managed to escape, as the hero seemed to be determined to catch the violators. He didn't immediately realize that the mask was torn, so he had no idea why the man let them go so easily. However, suddenly he touched his own face and realized that it was not covered, meaning his identity was now known to the enemies. Nevertheless, what he feared most was not the chance of being caught. He even considered the option of surrendering to the authorities himself. All because if his boss finds out about what happened, he will most likely severely punish his subordinate, if not kill him outright. Once Zeus witnessed him taking the life of one person and threatened that in case of disobedience, he would face the same fate. In the end, when the boss returned to the room, only the unconscious newcomer was lying on the floor. The main hero was no longer there. He didn't know what to do next, but going back seemed too dangerous, so the villain went home to rest a bit. Entering the dwelling, he thought that his neighbor was not home yet, as it was very dark inside and he wouldn't leave everything like that if he was present in the apartment. However, as soon as the guy turned on the light, he heard Evan's voice, waiting for him on the couch in the living room. He called the main hero Hermes, and under that name he was known as a villain, meaning the one who revealed his identity was this very person. After that, the guy didn't have time to understand anything before he was hit on the head to stun him and prevent him from leaving. He came to on his own bed, but the representative of the government organization was still sitting next to him. He held Nolan's phone, which had his correspondence with the boss open. Now it was clear that this would not end for him without consequences. Although the guy was always very unlucky, he had no idea that he lived in the same house as a hero.